My guest is Harold van Garderen. Welcome, Harold. You will talk about P&I, participatory narrative inquiry, and give some examples of P&I. But first of all, who's Harold van Garderen?
Harold is thank you for the invitation, by the way. I'm a chemist, but a more modeling theoretical chemist. I never liked benches and practical stuff a lot. And I ended up working in service innovation 10 years later and moving from agent-based modeling into how organizations develop new services. And I ran into some work on narrative and basically realized that it's the same. The things I was doing in chemistry related a lot onto how people change and how organizations change and how innovation takes place. So I basically stumbled in it and read some work from IBM and Dave Snowden and Cynthia Koerts and started applying it, and that's how I ended up in organizational narrative basically 10 years later.
Before we go into the examples that I mentioned earlier, perhaps in a few sentences or very briefly, you can explain what P&I is about before we go into the details.
P&I is about working and gathering stories and working with them to find patterns, to find surprising things that people know but not really are aware of. And we use it a lot in Story Connect. The company I have together with some other people is to bring organizations to the point where they can make better decisions and actually change the way they work or change the way they look at the world. And of course there's a big link there to complexity, making daily changes to guide your organization on a different path and change it from the track where it comes from. Yeah.
Let's go into some examples. Let's start with healthcare.
Healthcare, yeah, that's one of those industries that have become very technological, but are basically human at their core. And one of our first customers was Child and Hospital Foundation that came to us and said, well, we have this quality brand and we apply it already for 35 years, but we want to hear the voices of the children, of the parents, of the youth. And so we built a system called the Child and Hospital Monitor. And today there are over 6,500 stories in there, and people tell about the moment they got operated, the food they got after an operation. And from that we see the decision. We ask in P&I, we ask questions about a story. Usually in a survey you have this long list of questions, and in the end there's that part that you say, do you have anything more to tell us? And we start, do you have anything to tell us? And then we ask stories about it, and that elucidates patterns in the narrative that you can see who was involved in decision making, how did staff act, and from these patterns we see differences in hospitals, and hospitals use it to make improvements in the quality of care they provide. For instance, in the early years it was found that people don't work on child wards a lot had a different attitudes toward patients and children, and it was changed. They got basic new training, they were instructed to behave otherwise, and that's, I think, basically what it does. It humanizes healthcare again. And we use it today also in elderly care, in youth care evaluation, how youth care is delivered to citizens. And some good and some bad things turn out, but the basic thing is you got all the stories behind reality, and it shows you a way forward, a way to change, a way to make improvements to the system. And that's what P&I is very good at, to get people into creative mode again. Yeah.
Let's move on to finance and banking.
Oh, that's another story.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, well, basically, of course, in finance and banking, we've seen over the last 50 years that it has become a very technological-driven, statistics-driven industry with all the errors there's in. But what P&I can do there is go back to the ethics of banking. How do people behave? How do customers experience banking services. And that's one part of it, to get a story behind how the organization works, so the ethical auditing side. The other side, of course, is how do you make a banking organization think about their risks? And narrative stress testing, reverse stress testing can be done in an econometric way, but it can also be done in a narrative way. And we hope to do these projects in the banking industry, but also for large organizations that have a lot of financial interest, like governments or municipalities or institutions. And basically what you do there is you start working with the narratives of people, how they, if you would ask in a financial, can you tell a story of something that would go badly for this organization, what would the story be about? And if you do that with, say, 40 or 400 people, you can find what are their basic fears, what are their deep patterns, but also what are their deep hopes. And from that you can build a strategy to improve the financial functioning of an organization.
And compared, let's say, to the traditional modeling approach, what additional do you get out of it?
With the traditional approach you get answers to things you're looking at. And with narrative there's always, people tell you what you should hear, not what you want to hear. So I think the basic is that you go one level deeper, that you go towards the basic patterns how people function in the organization. Yeah.
And do you experience that, let's say, that people, managers, leaders of organizations are becoming more and more open to this approach?
Well, what we see is that a lot of organizations first want to try it with customers because that's safer. That was the big problem. Now the big thing in healthcare, that there is no outside, there's patients. But if, for instance, in a project we did for Dutch Rail, they wanted us to listen to the stories of the rail passengers, because customers are usually outside the system. So it's much safer to start with the outskirts of the organization, and doing this in your core processes can be scary. So yes, we tend to go further and further with applications into the core process of the organization, but a lot of organizations start with the outside, which is, by the way, also a very good idea, because a lot can be learned from customers. Their perspective on how services and products are experienced are very important. Yeah.
Another example, citizen engagement.
Yeah. What we've seen over the last, I think, 50 years, especially in the Western world, is that the level of education has risen. 50 years ago we had these television shows where the mayor of the city, together with the head of police, maybe you remember, it's called Zwiebertje in the Netherlands.
Yes.
They were basically the only knowledgeable people in the village. And today, any street you go into, there is more knowledge about the city, about the village, about society than there is in town halls. So basically what we see is a knowledge inversion in society. The country knows more than the government. The city knows more than City Hall. So I think it's time that organizations, or better society, finds way to embrace that knowledge to create a future together. And because P&I, participatory narrative inquiry, can both do continuous and scale and surprises, I think it's a very good method for
Could you elaborate a little bit on the
continuous, because
continuous and scale?
You collect stories through story points or through continuous debates around tables like this, and it's quite scalable and continuous. So it's not a point survey like Facebook, like Twitter. It's a continuous stream of stories if you organize it well. It's not about collecting, it's about the ability to make people feel safe to share stories about their daily situation. And it's participatory in the sense that you not only collect stories, but ask people to work with them, to interpret their own stories, or to work together to find patterns in their own stories.
Yeah.
And so, if, for instance, in a municipality, you would ask, how do we fix the city center? You can go to the experts, but you can also go to the people on the street. And if you do that on a regular basis and you invite people to work with you to improve the city center, I think you will have a much better chance of wasting not that much money and actually finding a way forward. Yeah.
So is one of the great things of P&I that you drill into knowledge and experience that otherwise would not be available?
Well, I think it's available, but not at the... It would only be at the individual level. If you do P&I and you collect larger number of stories, I mean not thousands, but even a couple of hundred is enough, you get a collective behind it, you get the collective insights, you get the more the diversity of patterns that are in the collective narratives. And I think the big flaw of traditional surveys is that they try to get to the average of things, while we are more interested into the outskirts of the statistics, the innovators, the people that experience things differently. And if 5 or 6 or 7% of the organization or the population have a different opinion, these are the innovators. They go lost in the statistics of the traditional approaches. And you won't find them in interviews. But if you go to a couple of hundreds of these kind of digital interviews like Story Points, I think you will find surprises, or you will find perspectives that don't come up in other approaches.
Yeah. How do you, as let's say, as a consultant, help the participants to make sense of the stories?
Yeah.
What's the role, and how can you avoid to fall in the same trap as the traditional approach, where you basically are not neutral in a way? And
it's a balance between making things very participatory. What we've noticed that it really helps when we don't collect the stories, but we help the organization share its own stories. Once you're beyond that point, last week in the municipality, we had something like 6 or 7 civil servants that we simply sent out on the street and said, go to these streets, go to the city mall, go and get some stories. And they got back very energized because they heard things that they suspected were there, but there were new perspectives on reality. So we try to keep the process as participatory as possible. The only drawback of that is that sometimes the customer says, what did you do? You didn't do any work. You made us do all the work. Should we pay for you for doing that? We do the work. And then we always say, and if we weren't around, would the work have been done anyway? And they say no. So that's what you pay us for, to make you work harder and more fun and more discovery.
Don't you also play a role in, let's say, in the phase after you've collected the stories? And
after
a little bit about that.
Collection and helping start sharing, then there is that decision making and sense making, and there usually where you see the old thinking of, can we really make decisions? In a lot of organizations are of course very hierarchical and use that the top management take decisions, and it's often quite a struggle also in healthcare to make groups realize, but we make decisions all the time. We do it as part of our work, and now we should learn again to do it a bit again as a collective. I had a situation in a healthcare organization where they were not creative enough to solve their own problems, and we had to help them, and you help them 3-4 times, but the key is not to fall in the traditional consultancy role again, and always try to reinstill those participatory decision-making patterns. And the final role is to prevent misuse of story banks after they've created, that people start to cherry pick from them and say, I like this story and I want to see more of that story only. You always should respect the diversity that you find and make small steps and small decisions to test what works out well and what doesn't. Because you can easily damage the narrative of the organization by becoming too goal-centered with it. Yeah.
When are you, let's say, happy after a project? What's a good P&I project?
Well, at Story Connect, that's a bit of an ambiguous answer. We are most happy when organizations say we want to continue and we want to move into continuous use of, even if it's periodic, even if it's every quarter. Because that's basically the moment when they say, okay, we see the value of it. Maybe the value is not fully 100% there yet, but we are on a road that we discover, rediscover the value of narrative again. So we are most happy when people say, come back this autumn. Yeah. And let's do this on a regular basis. But the other thing is, of course, when people thank you after a project. And for instance, I had an example with Dutch Rail last year where we collected 700 stories from rail passengers. And they say, thank you, we found 25 positive stories from passengers, which is a rare thing. And even if there were 675 negatives or neutral ones, they were very happy with it because these were the first examples. Said, okay, things go right in trains, which is great. And we knew it, but we never had any evidence. Because if you listen on Twitter, the moment the rail system breaks down, they got 40,000 negative tweets. And all these people, all these employees from Dutch Rail try to do their best, but it's never on Twitter. And it was in the stories, and they were very happy about it. These are moments of happiness. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Harold, for this conversation.
You're welcome. I hope more organizations will find the courage to re-embracing narrative again.
Thank you.